Welcome, dear listener. Take a slow breath in and let it drift out like the tide retreating into the night. You are here now, in a place where time softens, where each sound is gentle, and every moment moves at the pace of a dream. Let your body rest, sinking deeper into comfort. Perhaps you are curled beneath a blanket or lying where the night air brushes faintly across your skin. Wherever you are, the world outside can wait. Tonight, I'll tell you a story of quiet skies, of distant lights, and of two souls who found each other by following the same stars. There will be no rush, no sharp edges, only the slow unfolding of soft connection, and the hush of night holding them close. And as we begin, imagine the sound of the wind high above, brushing against the quiet edges of the clouds. Imagine the stars, steady in their places, watching over a story that has been waiting for many nights to be told. Mira had always liked the quiet hours after midnight. In the small town where she lived, the street lamps turned the roads to pools of gold, but above them, the sky stretched wide and dark, its surface scattered with points of light. Her favorite place to watch them was her rooftop. She would climb the narrow wooden ladder at the back of her house, her slippers brushing against the old shingles, and settle into the spot where the slope was soft enough to sit. The night air here always smelled faintly of the nearby pines, and in the summer of warm stone cooling after the day's sun. For as long as she could remember, Mira had been tracing shapes in the stars. Not the official constellations she'd seen in books, but ones that seemed to speak only to her. Her finger would drift through the air, linking faint lights into patterns that didn't appear on any chart she'd ever found. And there was one in particular, 7 small stars, not bright enough to demand attention, but steady, forming a delicate curve that bent upward into what might have been a hand, or a flower, or something else she couldn't name. She had been watching it for years. It always appeared in late summer, slipping just above the edge of the tallest pine. Whenever she saw it, a warmth would bloom quietly in her chest, like a voice whispering. Without words, she'd searched for it in star atlases and online maps, but it was never there. It was as though it existed only for her, a private thread sewn into the night. Sometimes she wondered if someone, somewhere else, was looking up at the same stars, tracing the same unseen curve with their hand, and in the stillness of those thoughts, she would pull her shawl closer, lean back on her hands, and watch until her eyes grew heavy, the stars softening into gentle glowing blurs. Tonight, the air was especially clear. The moon was low, and the pine's silhouette was sharp against the sky, and there in its usual place the nameless constellation waited, quiet and patient, as though it knew she would come. Mira's lips curved into the smallest smile, her breath slow and even. She whispered into the quiet, not really expecting an answer. "I wonder if you mean something far above." The stars gave no reply, but something in their stillness made her feel almost answered. The night passed gently, but sleep never quite came. Mira lay in bed, the curtains drawn back so she could still see a slice of sky. Her mind returned again and again to that small curve of stars. It was not restlessness. Not exactly, more a sense that the night was still holding something. After a while, she rose again, pulling her shawl loosely over her shoulders. Her slippers made almost no sound on the wooden floor, and the air in her house was cool, as though the night had drifted in to sit quietly in the corners. Outside, the town was asleep. The street lamps hummed faintly. Somewhere far away, an owl gave a single call. She began to walk. It wasn't a decision, more like a soft pull, as though the stars themselves had tilted slightly, inviting her to follow. The road curved out of town, narrowing into a path between low hills. The grass whispered in the breeze, and the scent of pine followed her, familiar yet fresh in the cool air. Above her, the nameless constellation drifted slowly westward, just high enough to stay in view. She kept it in her sight, each step carrying her closer to. Somewhere, the hills rose higher now, and from their crest, she could see more of the valley, a sweep of shadowed fields, a silver thread of river catching starlight, and beyond, something she had never noticed before, a shape on the far slope, low and domed, its roof glinting faintly in the starlight. It looked almost like an observatory, but she was certain there wasn't one marked anywhere nearby. Her steps slowed. She listened, but the night was quiet, save for the soft shiver of grass and the faint murmur of the wind. Drawn by the stillness, she walked on. The air cooled further as she descended into the hollow, and the smell of the earth was richer here, like rain that hadn't yet fallen. When she reached the building, she saw that it was small, perhaps no larger than a single room, its stone walls weathered, its round roof smooth and pale under the stars. A wooden door stood slightly ajar. She hesitated, her fingers resting on the edge of the frame. It wasn't fear, but a quiet awareness, like the moment before opening a book whose first line you somehow know will matter. And with the faintest breath, she pushed it open, stepping into a space that smelled of paper, metal, and the long patience of the sky inside. The light was soft, not from lamps, but from the round opening in the roof, where the night sky poured in like a quiet stream. The air held the faint scent of wood polish and the metallic tang of the telescope that stood in the center of the room. Around the walls, low shelves were lined with books, maps rolled neatly into tubes, and notebooks stacked in uneven towers. At first, Mira thought she was alone. But then she noticed movement in the shadow by the far shelf. A man stood there, leafing slowly through a large, worn book. His posture was calm, as though he had been waiting in the company of the stars for a very long time. He looked up when he heard her steps, and his expression was not one of surprise but recognition. "You found it," he said quietly. His voice was low and even, like the sound of dusk settling over the hills. Mira's fingers tightened slightly around her shawl. "I didn't know this place existed," she murmured. He smiled faintly, closing the book and setting it on the table. "I suppose it waits for those who look long enough." Her gaze drifted to the pages. There, drawn in careful lines, was the same curve of 7 small stars she had been tracing for years. Beneath the sketch, in neat handwriting, was a single word: Mira. Her breath caught, but in a way that was soft, like the moment a cloud moves aside to reveal the moon. "You've seen it too," she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded, stepping closer, not hurriedly, but with the quiet rhythm of someone moving through a dream. "For as long as I can remember," he replied. "It never had a place on the charts. So I gave it a name, her." Eyes lifted to meet his. "In my language," he added gently, "Mira means to look. But it also means wonder." The stillness between them was not empty, it was full, like the silence under the deepest part of the night sky. They stood together for a while, the open dome above letting the stars pour down, the telescope quietly waiting, and the little constellation hanging exactly where it always had, patient, watching, as though it had been leading them both here all along. They stepped toward the center of the room, where the telescope stood, angled toward the patch of sky just above the pine-covered ridge. The man adjusted it gently, the smooth turn of the brass wheels sounding like a faint sigh. He stepped aside, inviting her to look. Mira bent to the eyepiece. And there it was, her constellation, clearer than she had ever seen it before. The 7 points glowed softly against the dark, the curve so familiar that she almost reached out to trace it on the glass. "It's exactly the same," she whispered. "I thought I was the only one," he said. His tone was warm, not in surprise, but in the relief of finding someone who had been holding the same quiet truth. They sat at the small table beside the telescope, the book of sketches between them. He showed her pages from years past, each summer marked with a new drawing of the constellation, its position shifting slightly through the seasons, but always returning. And as she turned the pages, she realized something: the earliest drawings looked almost exactly like the shapes she herself had traced in her old notebooks. "It feels like it's been waiting," she said slowly, "like it's been keeping watch." He nodded, his gaze resting on her in a way that made the air feel softer around them. "I think some things aren't just patterns," he replied. "Some are connections, threads between people who haven't met yet." They sat in the gentle quiet of the observatory, the open dome above framing the deep night. The stars were steady, their light old and patient, and in that stillness it seemed undeniable they had been following the same lights all their lives, their paths curving toward this single point, as naturally as the stars themselves followed their own hidden arcs. Outside, the wind brushed lightly against the walls, a low and steady sound that made the moment feel even more enclosed. as though the night had drawn its edges closer to hold them in this small, certain circle of time. After a while, they stepped outside into the cool breath of the night. The observatory sat on a rise above the valley, and from here the hills stretched away in soft shadows, folding into one another until they disappeared into the horizon. The air smelled faintly of wild mint, and the grass whispered around their ankles. They didn't speak. There was no need. Side by side, they walked a little way up the slope until the sky opened above them in a wide, unbroken sweep. He carried a woolen blanket over his arm, and when they reached the crest, he spread it out on the grass without a word. They lay back, the earth cool and steady beneath them, the stars vast and still above. The little constellation was there, settled into its place, its curve unmistakable. It seemed to hang lower tonight, as if leaning closer to listen. Her hand rested on the blanket between them. After a while, she felt the faint brush of his fingers against hers, not a grip, not even a clear touch, just the soft warmth of nearness.it was enough. The world around them moved in slow, invisible ways, a meteor sliding quietly across the far edge of the sky, a breeze turning the grass so that it shimmered silver in the starlight, the faintest scent of pine drifting down from the ridge. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the silence between their breaths. It was a steady rhythm, like the quiet ticking of a clock that belonged only to the two of them. When she opened her eyes again, the stars seemed softer, their light less like points and more like threads, weaving the night together in long, patient loops somewhere deep inside. She felt that this was not an ending, but a place she could return to in thought whenever she wished to remember what it felt like to belong quietly beside someone. The night deepened around them, settling like a soft blanket across the hills. The air grew cooler, and the grass beneath the blanket seemed to exhale the day's warmth, carrying with it the scent of soil and pine. Above, the stars shimmered in slow pulses, as if their light were breathing, in and out, in and out. The little constellation was steady, its curve a familiar arc, quietly watching over them. Mira felt her eyelids grow heavier, each blink lingering a little longer than the last. The steady rhythm of his breathing beside her became part of the night's own heartbeat. In that in-between place, not quite awake, not quite asleep, she thought she saw the stars moving, drifting closer together, their light weaving delicate strands across the dark. For a moment, it was as if the curve of 7 stars tilted gently, wrapping around them like a hand cupped to shield a candle from the wind. She turned her head just enough to see him. His eyes were closed, but his face was calm, as though the quiet had reached every part of him. Her fingers brushed his once more, and this time, his hand rested lightly over hers. No words, only the shared stillness, the understanding that neither of them would forget this night. The breeze softened, the hills seemed to fade into the dark, and the stars, patient as ever, held their places, waiting for the next night, the next quiet gaze, the next time two paths would meet beneath their light. Mira's last waking thought was simple and warm, that some things do not need names to be known. But when they are named, they become a place to return to, again and again, like the memory of a star that was always there. And as sleep took her, the constellation drifted softly in her mind, blurring into dream, a gentle curve of light that would wait, always to be found again.
Thank